The floor of the transport shudders under my boots, and every alarm in my body goes off before a single siren sounds. My name is Nora Blake. I am the only human in a class of 42 students from 12 different worlds, and right now, sitting in the back row of a shuttle, heading toward a moon that everyone else calls harmless, I am the only one who feels the wrongness pressing against my skin like a held breath. Nobody else notices. That is the first thing you learn about soft worlds. Their people grow up without needing to notice. 3 hours earlier, I was sitting in xenobiology, half listening to Professor Elira Voss describe atmospheric compositions, while the students around me traded quiet jokes about my species. It happens so often that I barely register it anymore. A tall, pale blue student named Drin Kessel, who sits 2 rows ahead of me and never misses a chance to remind everyone that his homeworld has had peaceful skies for 11,000 years, was telling his friends that humans are the only species in the academy who needed 3 attempts to survive their own planet. They laughed. Not cruelly, not exactly. More like the way people laugh at a puppy that barks at its own shadow. Like I could not possibly understand what they were talking about, so there was no harm in saying it in front of me. I did not correct him. I never do. There is a difference between explaining something and being believed, and I learned a long time ago that some lessons cannot be taught with words. They have to be shown. I kept my eyes on my notes and let the moment pass, the way I always do, the way I was trained to do before I ever set foot on this station. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is what keeps you alive when the world around you has teeth. Professor Voss clapped her long fingers together to get the room's attention. She announced, in the breezy tone reserved for something she considered a formality, that our next field study would take place on Carnes Hollow, a moon officially classified as ecologically dormant. No predators, no toxic atmosphere, no active geological threats. A perfect location, she said, for new students to practice basic survival observation without any real risk. The class cheered. Someone asked if we would have free time to take pictures for our personal records. Someone else asked if the moon had any interesting rock formations worth studying for a report. I did not cheer. I felt a small, cold thread tighten somewhere behind my ribs, the same feeling I used to get as a child back on Earth, right before a storm that the sky had not warned anyone about yet. I raised my hand and asked when the last full ecological survey of the moon had been conducted. Professor Voss checked her datapad, frowned slightly, and said the most recent survey was recorded 18 years ago, but that nothing of concern had ever been reported there. She said it with the confidence of someone who has never had to survive being wrong. 18 years is a long time for a place to stay quiet. On a world like mine, 18 years is enough time for an entire ecosystem to shift, for new predators to move in, for a place once considered safe to become something else entirely. Nobody else in that room understood that, because nobody else in that room had ever lived somewhere that punished carelessness. I did not argue. Arguing would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant remembering things I try very hard not to remember in front of strangers. So I simply nodded, gathered my things when the bell chimed, and boarded the transport with the rest of my class 3 hours later, carrying a quiet unease that none of them could see. Now, sitting in my seat near the back of the shuttle, I watch Carnes Hollow grow larger through the viewport. Pale gray terrain, jagged ridgelines, deep canyons cut like old scars across the surface. From orbit, it looks peaceful, empty, the kind of place a tired mind can decide to trust. But I am not looking at the terrain the way my classmates are looking at it. I am looking at the patterns. There is a particular kind of silence that empty places have, and a particular kind of silence that hunted places have. They are not the same, even though they sound almost identical to someone who has never had to tell the difference. Empty silence is loose and even. Hunted silence has weight to it. It presses. As the shuttle descends and the ramp lowers, releasing us onto the dusty gray ground, I feel that second kind of silence settle over the group, like a hand pressing down on the back of my neck. Drin walks past me, adjusting the strap of his equipment bag, and gives me a small, amused glance. "Careful out there, Nora," he says, loud enough for the nearby students to hear. I know your species did not have this kind of open space to walk around in. Try not to trip over a rock. A few students laugh softly. I let it slide off me the way rain slides off stone. I have heard worse. I have survived worse. This is nothing. Professor Voss leads us along a marked path between two rocky ridges, describing local mineral deposits in an even, academic tone. The class listens, some taking notes, some quietly chatting, all of them relaxed in a way that only comes from growing up somewhere nothing ever truly threatens you. I stay a few paces back from the group, my eyes moving across the terrain instead of the professor. I notice things the others do not. A set of deep gouges carved into a boulder near the path, too high and too wide to have been made by wind or erosion. A patch of pale gray dust, disturbed in a straight dragging line, as if something heavy had recently been pulled across it. A faint, coppery scent riding on the thin breeze, one that most species in this class have never had a reason to learn. I know that scent. I learned it a long time ago, in a place far harsher than this one. None of them notice it. They are busy admiring the rock formations, taking pictures, laughing at each other's jokes. I keep walking, quiet, watching, my senses stretched wide the way they were trained to be stretched, since I was a child too young to understand why silence. A soft classmate named Mira Osei, one of the few who has never mocked me, falls into step beside me. She notices my quiet focus and tilts her head. You look tense, she says gently. Everything okay? I glance at her, then back at the terrain. This place does not feel as empty as they think it is, I say quietly. She studies my face for a moment, clearly unsure whether to take me seriously. Most people here do not know what it means when a person like me says something feels wrong. On my world, that sentence saves lives. Here, it barely registers as a warning at all. The scanners cleared it, she offers, trying to reassure herself more than me. Professor Voss said there is nothing dangerous here. I do not answer right away. I am watching a distant ridge where the shadows sit a little too still, where the wind does not seem to move the dust the way it should. My pulse stays calm, but my body settles into an old familiar readiness, the kind that never fully leaves you once you have learned it. Scanners only find what they are built to look for, I finally say. They are not always looking for the right thing. Mira gives a small, uncertain laugh, unsure if I am joking. I am not. We continue along the path as Professor Voss gestures toward a wide canyon ahead, explaining that we will study rock layering there before returning to the shuttle. The group moves forward, chatting, relaxed, cameras raised toward the pale gray cliffs. I stay a few steps behind, eyes fixed on the canyon entrance, on the way the shadows pool unusually deep along its edges, despite the angle of the sun. My heartbeat, low and steady, begins to shift into something sharper. Something is wrong here. Something that has been sleeping, or waiting, or simply avoiding notice for a very long time. And as the class walks deeper into the canyon, laughing, chatting, utterly unaware, the ground beneath our boots gives the faintest, almost imperceptible tremor. Nobody else seems to feel it. I do. And in that single moment, standing in the growing shadow of the canyon walls, surrounded by classmates who have never once had to fear the ground they walk on, I understand with complete certainty that Carnes Hollow is not the peaceful, dormant place everyone believes it to be. Something out there is still very much alive, and it has just noticed us. The canyon narrows as we walk deeper, its gray walls rising higher on either side until the sky above becomes a thin, pale ribbon. Professor Voss continues her lecture on rock layering, pointing out bands of color pressed into the stone like pages in an ancient book. Most of the class listens with polite interest, snapping pictures, murmuring notes into their data pads. I stop listening to her voice entirely. My attention has shifted somewhere else, somewhere lower and closer, to the ground itself. There is a rhythm to how dust settles in a place that nothing disturbs, and a different rhythm to how it settles in a place something moves through often. The ground beneath us carries the second kind, Faint drag marks curve along the canyon floor, half hidden beneath wind-blown sand, but unmistakable to eyes trained to look for them. They are not fresh, but they are not old either. Something has passed through here recently, more than once, following a path it clearly knows well. I glance toward Mira, who is walking a few paces ahead of me, focused on the professor's lecture. I consider saying something, warning her, warning all of them, but I know exactly how that conversation would go. They would smile politely, thank me for my concern, and continue exactly as they were. Soft worlds trust their instruments and their institutions far more than they trust a quiet feeling in someone's chest, especially when that someone comes from a species they have already decided is behind them in every meaningful way. So instead, I do what I have always done. I watch, I wait, I prepare. We reach a wide, open section of the canyon, a natural amphitheater carved from stone, walls curving around us in a rough circle. Professor Voss gestures for the class to gather here, explaining that this will be our primary study site for the next hour. Equipment cases are unpacked, small scanning devices are set on tripods, students spread out in pairs and small groups, chatting as they begin their assignments. I stay near the edge of the group, my back close to the canyon wall, my eyes sweeping the high ridges above us. From this angle, I can see narrow ledges and dark crevices cut into the upper rock face, places where something large enough could rest unseen, watching, waiting for stillness before it moves. Drin Kessel, working with two other students nearby, glances over and catches me watching the cliffs instead of my assignment sheet. "Something interesting up there, Nora?" he asks, a teasing edge in his voice. "Or is this just what your species does when it does not understand the material?" A couple of nearby students laugh quietly. I do not look away from the ridge. "I am checking for movement," I say simply. Drin raises an eyebrow, clearly expecting a joke to follow. When none comes, he shrugs and turns back to his equipment, muttering something about humans being strange even when they try to be serious. I let it go. His opinion of me does not matter right now. What matters is the low, distant sound I just heard, carried faintly on the canyon breeze. A sound too soft for most of the class to notice, over their own chatter and equipment hums. A long, dragging scrape of something heavy moving across stone, somewhere above and behind the ridge to our left. My pulse steadies into something sharp and clear, the way it always does when instinct takes over from thought. I have felt this exact sensation before, back on Earth, during training exercises meant to prepare children like me for a world that never stopped testing us. It is not fear exactly. It is readiness. The kind that arrives quietly and settles into your bones long before your mind fully understands why. I move closer to Professor Voss, keeping my voice low. "I think we should consider relocating the group," I say. "There may be movement near the upper ridges." She glances up from her datapad, mild confusion crossing her face. "Movement? Our scanners have not detected any biological signatures larger than small insects." "Scanners can miss things," I say carefully, "especially in terrain like this, with this much mineral interference in the rock." She studies me for a moment, clearly weighing whether to take my concern seriously or dismiss it as nerves from an inexperienced student. In the end, she offers a polite, reassuring smile, the kind adults give children who are imagining monsters in the dark. "I appreciate your caution, Nora. Truly," she says. "But this moon has been surveyed and cleared. I understand that where you come from, caution like this may have been necessary constantly. Here, it is simply not required." The words are not cruel, but they land with a familiar weight. It is not the first time someone has mistaken my caution for fear born of a difficult upbringing, rather than knowledge earned through experience. I nod once and step back, understanding that nothing more I say will change her mind. I return to my equipment case near the canyon wall, but instead of beginning my assignment, I quietly recalculate the terrain around us. I mark in my mind the nearest points of solid cover, the narrowest sections of the canyon that could be defended if needed, the direction of the wind, the location of every member of my class relative to the open ground at the center of the amphitheater. This is not paranoia, this is preparation. On my world, the difference between those two things is often the difference between walking home and not walking home at all. 20 minutes pass. The class continues their work, unaware of anything unusual. I remain alert, tracking small details, the occasional loose pebble skittering down from the high ridges, the way local insects have gone almost completely silent, the faint, coppery scent from earlier growing slightly stronger on the breeze. Mira notices my continued unease and drifts closer to me, lowering her voice. "You really think something is out there?" she asks, her earlier teasing tone gone now, replaced with genuine curiosity. "I know something is out there," I answer honestly. "I do not know what yet, but the ground has been telling us since we arrived." She glances nervously toward the ridges, suddenly less certain of the safety everyone else seems to feel. "Should we tell the others?" "I already tried," I say. "They will not listen until they see it themselves." Mira falls quiet, clearly unsettled but unsure what to do with information the rest of the group has already dismissed. I do not blame her. It is not easy to act against the confidence of an entire group, especially when that group includes trained instructors who insist there is nothing to fear. The wind shifts, and with it comes a sound none of us can ignore this time. A low, resonant growl, deep enough to vibrate faintly through the stone beneath our boots, rolling down from somewhere high above the canyon's northern ridge. Every student in the amphitheater freezes. For one long suspended moment, nobody moves, nobody speaks. The only sound is the soft whisper of wind curling through the canyon and the distant fading echo of that growl. Then Professor Voss lifts her scanner, tapping at its surface with clear alarm, now creeping into her expression. That should not be possible," she mutters, half to herself. "There is no signature matching that on record for this moon." I already know the scanner will not find an answer in time. Whatever made that sound has likely learned, over many years of solitude, exactly how to avoid detection. Predators that survive long enough in quiet, forgotten places do not survive by being loud or careless. They survive by being patient. And patience, I know all too well, always ends the same way, with movement. A second growl answers the first, closer this time, echoing from a different section of the ridge entirely. Then a third, further to our right. The sound is not coming from one creature. It is coming from several. Panic begins rippling through the group in soft gasps and frightened whispers. Equipment is abandoned mid-scan. Students huddle closer together instinctively, eyes wide, searching the ridgelines for any sign of movement. Professor Voss raises her voice, trying to organize an orderly retreat back toward the canyon entrance, but her tone carries an unmistakable thread of fear now, the fear of someone facing a situation her training never prepared her for. I do not join the scramble toward the entrance. Instead, I move quickly but calmly toward the nearest defensible position, a narrow outcrop of stone jutting from the canyon wall that offers partial cover and a clear line of sight to the open ground. My mind runs through terrain, distances, and escape routes with the same clear, practiced focus I was taught as a child, back when survival was not a subject studied in a classroom, but a lesson written directly onto the land itself. Mira grabs my arm, her voice trembling. "Nora, what do we do?" I glance toward the ridges, where shadows are beginning to shift in ways shadows should not shift. My pulse remains steady, sharp, focused, the exact opposite of the panic spreading through the rest of the group. "We stop running blindly," I say quietly, "and we start thinking like something that has survived worse than this." Above us, along the jagged edge of the northern ridge, a shape detaches itself from the shadows, large and low, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that no soft-world creature could ever replicate. The class falls into stunned, terrified silence as it comes fully into view, and for the first time since stepping onto this moon, I feel something other than caution settle over me. I feel ready. The creature moves along the ridge with unhurried confidence, the confidence of something that has never once had to fear what stands below it. Its body is long and low, covered in pale gray plating that matches the stone around it almost perfectly, which explains how it managed to remain hidden even under the watchful gaze of orbital scanners. Its head swings slowly from side to side, tasting the air, tracking the scent of 42 frightened students clustered together in the open ground of the amphitheater. Behind it, two more shapes emerge from separate points along the ridge, smaller but no less alert, moving with the same slow, deliberate patience. A hunting group. Not a single predator caught by surprise, but a coordinated pack that has likely been watching us since the moment our shuttle touched down. Professor Voss's voice cracks through the panic, trying desperately to organize the class into some kind of retreat, but her instructions come out disjointed, contradicted almost as quickly as she gives them. She has clearly never faced a situation like this before, not once in her long academic career, and the fear in her voice only deepens the fear rippling through the students around her. Chaos spreads fast. Some students turn and run blindly toward the canyon entrance, colliding with others who are frozen in place, too shocked to move. Equipment cases are knocked over and abandoned. Someone screams. Another student stumbles and falls, scraping against the rocky ground, too terrified to notice the pain. I do not run. Running blindly into unfamiliar terrain, away from any planned route, is exactly how prey gets separated from the group and picked off one at a time. I learned that lesson long before I ever set foot on this station, in a place where mistakes like that were rarely given a second chance. Instead, I move with purpose toward the narrow outcrop of stone I identified earlier, pulling Mira along with me by the sleeve. She stumbles but keeps pace, her breathing ragged with fear. "This way," I say, my voice low and steady, deliberately calm in a way I know will help her focus rather than spiral further into panic. "Do not run in a straight line. Stay close to the wall." She nods quickly, too frightened to question me, and follows. Around us, the chaos continues. Drin Kessel, the same student who mocked my caution less than an hour ago, stands frozen near the center of the open ground, staring up at the approaching predator with wide, horrified eyes. His confidence, so easily worn back in the safety of a classroom, has completely abandoned him now that real danger stands only a short distance away. The lead creature lets out a low, rumbling call, and the two smaller ones begin descending the ridge with quick, controlled movements, cutting off the most direct path back toward the canyon entrance. They are hurting us, splitting our only escape route deliberately, forcing the group into a smaller, more manageable space. This is not the behavior of a mindless predator. This is coordinated, practiced, a hunting pattern refined over countless successful attempts. I press my back against the stone outcrop, pulling Mira down beside me, and quickly scan the terrain for anything usable. A length of metal support rod lies discarded near an abandoned equipment case a short distance away, likely part of a tripod stand knocked over in the panic. Loose stones litter the ground near my feet, heavy enough to throw with force. The narrow gap in the rock behind us leads to a tighter passage that could funnel a larger creature into a single, predictable approach if needed. None of this is comfortable. None of this is safe. But it is workable, and workable is often the only thing standing between a person and disaster. "Nora," Mira whispers, voice trembling. "What are they?" "I do not know their species," I admit quietly, "but I know exactly what they are doing, and that matters more right now." She stares at me, confusion cutting briefly through her fear. I do not have time to explain further. The lead predator has fixed its attention on a small cluster of students near the center of the amphitheater, students too paralyzed by fear to move, and it begins closing the distance with slow, measured steps. Professor Voss shouts a warning, but her voice cracks with panic rather than authority, and the students remain frozen, caught in the specific kind of stillness that comes from a mind that has simply never been taught how to process real danger. I cannot let this happen, not because I am fearless, not because I enjoy this, but because I recognize, with absolute clarity, that nobody else here is capable of stopping what is about to happen. And I am. I grab the metal support rod from the ground beside the abandoned equipment case, feeling its familiar weight settle into my grip, and move quickly along the edge of the amphitheater, staying low, using scattered boulders as partial cover, the way I was taught to do since before I could properly read. "Hey!" I shout, my voice carrying sharply across the open ground. "Over here!" The lead predator's head snaps toward me instantly, drawn by the sudden movement and sound. Its attention shifts away from the frozen students, locking onto me instead. This is exactly what I wanted. A predator's attention is a resource, and right now, every second it spends focused on me is a second the rest of my class has to find safety. The creature lets out a low, warning growl and begins moving toward me instead, its pace quickening slightly, clearly recalculating its approach now that its intended target has changed. I retreat carefully toward the narrow rock passage behind me, keeping my movements controlled, my breathing steady, refusing to let panic dictate my choices the way it has clearly dictated everyone else's. Behind me, I hear Professor Voss finally managing to organize a partial retreat, herding a cluster of students back toward the canyon entrance while the two smaller predators circle cautiously, seemingly uncertain about pressing a full attack against a group still holding together. Good. That is exactly the opening they need. The lead predator follows me into the narrow passage, exactly as I hoped it would. The walls here rise close on either side, tight enough to prevent it from using its full size and speed effectively, forcing it into a slower, more deliberate approach. This is not an accident. This is terrain I identified and chose specifically for this purpose. It lunges once, testing me, and I sidestep quickly, using the confined space to my advantage, striking the metal rod hard against a section of loose rock above its head. The resulting rockfall is small, but sudden, and loud enough to startle the creature back a step, buying me a precious moment to reposition myself deeper into a defensible pocket of stone. My heart pounds steadily, controlled, focused, not the wild panic that grips someone facing danger for the first time, but the familiar, disciplined rhythm of someone who has done this before, many times, in places far less forgiving than this one. Memories flicker briefly at the edges of my focus, unbidden but not unwelcome. A dense forest back on Earth, thick with predators far larger and more numerous than what I face now. My grandmother's calm, steady voice teaching me how to read tracks in mud before I was old enough to understand why it mattered. The specific, cold clarity that settles over a person the first time they realize that survival is not guaranteed, that it is something earned through preparation, patience, and the willingness to act when others freeze. I press those memories aside gently, keeping my focus on the present moment. There will be time to remember later, if I survive this. The predator circles cautiously now, clearly unaccustomed to prey that does not simply flee in blind panic. I keep my movements deliberate, controlled, using the narrow terrain to limit its options while I search for an opening. It lunges again, faster this time, and I duck low, letting it pass just above me, using the moment to drive the metal rod firmly against a joint along its foreleg. The creature recoils with a sharp, pained growl, stumbling back several steps, clearly caught off guard by resistance it did not expect from prey this small. For the first time since the encounter began, I see something shift in its posture. Not fear exactly, but reassessment. It is beginning to understand that I am not the easy target it initially assumed. Good. Let it understand. Behind me, faint shouts carry from the direction of the canyon entrance, Professor Voss's voice mixing with the frightened cries of students being guided toward safety. I do not turn to look. Turning away now would be a mistake I cannot afford. The predator lunges a third time, more cautious now, testing rather than committing fully. I meet its approach with controlled movement, using the narrow rock walls to limit its angle of attack, striking again with practiced precision aimed at vulnerable points along its limbs and joints, rather than attempting anything reckless against its heavily plated body. Slowly, gradually, the exchange shifts. What began as a predator confidently pursuing easy prey has become something far more even, far more costly for the creature than it anticipated. It begins to hesitate before each approach, clearly recalculating whether continuing this pursuit is worth the effort. I keep my breathing steady, my stance low and balanced, refusing to give it any opening born of exhaustion or carelessness. This is not about overpowering something larger and stronger than me. It never has been. This is about patience, terrain, and the simple, hard-earned understanding that fear, left unchecked, is far more dangerous than any predator could ever be. Finally, after one last cautious feint that I meet without flinching, the creature lets out a low, frustrated growl and begins retreating back up the narrow passage, choosing to abandon a pursuit that has cost it far more than it expected. I do not chase it. Chasing a retreating predator into unfamiliar terrain is exactly the kind of mistake that turns a survived encounter into a fatal one. Instead, I remain still, watching carefully until it disappears fully back into the shadows of the upper ridge, before finally allowing myself a slow, controlled breath. My hands are steady. My pulse, still elevated, begins settling back toward its normal rhythm. I lean briefly against the cool stone wall of the passage, allowing myself one quiet moment before returning to the rest of my class. When I step back out into the open ground of the amphitheater, the scene that greets me is one of scattered chaos, slowly settling into stunned silence. Professor Voss has managed to gather most of the students near the canyon entrance, the two smaller predators having retreated once their pack leader abandoned its pursuit. Equipment lies scattered across the ground, forgotten in the panic, and every single person present is staring directly at me. Mira reaches me first, relief washing visibly across her face as she grips my arm. "You're okay," she breathes. I thought it had you." "I am fine," I say simply, my voice calm despite the adrenaline still fading slowly from my system. Drin Kessel stands a short distance away, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something far more complicated. He stares at me with an expression I have never once seen him wear before. Not amusement, not condescension. Something closer to disbelief. Professor Voss approaches carefully, her own composure only partially restored, studying me with an expression caught somewhere between relief and confusion. "Nora," she says slowly, "how did you know what to do?" I glance briefly toward the ridge where the predator disappeared, memories of a much harsher world settling quietly at the edges of my mind. "Because this is not the first time I have had to learn a lesson like this," I say quietly. "It is just the first time any of you have had to watch." Silence follows my words, heavy and complete, broken only by the distant, fading echo of a predator's retreat and the soft, uneven breathing of a class that has just learned, in the most direct way possible, exactly what kind of world shaped the quiet student they never bothered to truly see. The relief does not last long. I know it will not, even before Professor Voss finishes counting heads and realizing that our transport pickup point lies nearly 2 kilometers away, back through the same canyon system the predators clearly call home. The class gathers near the canyon entrance, shaken but mostly unharmed. A few scrapes and bruises from the panicked scramble. Nothing serious. Professor Voss attempts to raise the orbital shuttle on her communicator, but the response crackles with static, distorted by the same mineral interference in the rock that likely hid the predators from scanner detection in the first place. "The signal is too weak here," she says, frustration and lingering fear tightening her voice. "We need to reach higher ground, closer to the ridgeline, before we can establish a clear connection." Higher ground. Closer to the exact terrain where the predators retreated only minutes ago. I step forward before anyone else can respond, my mind already working through the terrain we passed on our way into the canyon. "There is an alternate route," I say. "Along the eastern wall, lower than the main ridge, further from where the pack was denned. It adds distance, but it keeps us away from their territory." Professor Voss turns to me, her earlier hesitation to trust my judgment now visibly gone, replaced by something closer to reliance. "You saw a route like that?" I noticed it on the way in, I say simply. I always look for more than one way in and out of a place. It is a habit born from necessity, not choice, though I do not say that part aloud. Some things are easier shown than explained, and today has already shown this class more than words ever could. The group begins moving along the route I describe, sticking close together now in a way they were not doing before, spacing themselves more evenly, watching the ridgelines instead of their data pads. Fear has taught them, in the space of a single hour, lessons that an entire semester of lectures never managed to. Mira walks close beside me, her earlier trembling replaced now by quiet, focused determination. "How did you know they would hurt us that way?" she asks. "Toward the narrow passage? Predators that hunt in groups rarely attack head-on unless they have no other choice," I explain quietly, keeping my eyes moving across the surrounding terrain even as I speak. It costs too much energy, too much risk. They prefer to control the space first, cut off options, and let fear do most of the work before they ever need to commit fully. "That's horrifying," she murmurs. "It's efficient," I correct gently. "Fear is a tool. Whether you're the one using it or the one caught inside it depends entirely on whether you understand how it works." She glances at me, something shifting in her expression, no longer simple curiosity, but a kind of quiet respect that was not there this morning. We continue along the eastern route, the canyon walls gradually lowering around us as we climb toward higher, more open terrain. The tension in the group remains high, every rustle of wind through loose stone drawing nervous glances, but the earlier chaos has settled into something more controlled, more disciplined. Then, without warning, a low growl rolls across the terrain ahead of us, cutting through the tense quiet. The group freezes instantly. I scan the ridge above the path we are walking and spot movement almost immediately. One of the two smaller predators from earlier, positioned along a rocky outcrop directly in our route, blocking the path forward. It has not attacked yet, but its posture is unmistakable, low, coiled, ready. Professor Voss's hand tightens around her communicator, though we all know it will not help us here. "It found us again," she whispers, fear creeping back into her voice. "It never lost us," I correct quietly, already assessing the terrain around the blocked path. "We are still in territory it considers its own. It was only a matter of time before one of them tried again. This time, though, the class does not scatter into panic. Every eye turns toward me instead, waiting, trusting, in a way that would have seemed impossible only an hour ago. I study the outcrop carefully, noting the narrow ledge the creature stands on, the loose scree scattered along the slope beneath it, the distance between its position and the safer lower ground where the rest of the group currently stands. "We are not going to fight this one," I say clearly, loud enough for the whole group to hear. "We are going to make it decide leaving is easier than staying." Drine steps closer, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier condescension. "What do you need us to do?" The question catches me slightly off guard. An hour ago, this same student mocked my caution in front of the entire class. Now he stands ready to follow my lead without hesitation. "Stay grouped, stay low, and do not run," I instruct. Movement in a tight group is harder for it to target than movement in a scattered one. I am going to draw its attention toward the loose scree on the slope. When it moves to intercept me, the rest of you continue past the outcrop toward the ridgeline beyond it. Professor Voss hesitates only briefly before nodding, her trust in my judgment now fully earned rather than simply given. I move carefully toward the base of the slope, staying low, keeping my movements deliberate rather than hurried. The predator's head swings toward me immediately, drawn by the motion, its posture shifting from guarding the path to actively considering pursuit. I press further along the slope, deliberately putting distance between myself and the rest of the group, drawing its focus fully onto me. My pulse remains steady, controlled, the same discipline that carried me through the earlier encounter, settling firmly back into place. The creature finally commits, descending from the outcrop toward me with quick, controlled movements, exactly as I hoped. Behind it, the path forward now stands clear. Professor Voss quickly guides the rest of the class forward along the lower route, moving quickly but calmly past the outcrop, while the predator's attention remains locked entirely on me. I retreat carefully along the slope, using the scattered scree to control the pace of its approach, forcing it to pick its footing carefully rather than closing the distance quickly. Loose stone shifts and slides beneath its weight with each step, exactly as I predicted it would. When it finally draws close enough, I grab a loose section of rock and throw it hard against a cluster of larger stones positioned just above the creature's path. The resulting small rock slide is enough to startle it back several steps, breaking its focused pursuit and forcing it to reassess the terrain beneath it. I use the moment to put further distance between us, moving quickly but carefully back toward the lower ground where the rest of the class has now safely passed the outcrop. The predator lets out a frustrated growl, clearly weighing whether continuing this pursuit is worth the trouble, before finally turning and retreating back up the slope toward the higher ridge, choosing to abandon the chase entirely. I do not linger to watch it go. Instead, I turn and quickly rejoin my class, who have gathered a short distance ahead, watching with a mixture of relief and something that looks remarkably like awe. Mira reaches me first again, her hand briefly gripping my shoulder. "You did that on purpose," she says, half question, half realization. "You drew it away, just like before." It is easier to manage one predator's attention than to protect 40 scattered people, I say simply. The goal was never to win a fight. The goal was to make sure nobody here had to. Professor Voss studies me for a long moment, her expression unreadable at first, before finally speaking. "I owe you an apology, Nora. I dismissed your concerns earlier, and that mistake nearly cost this class dearly." I shake my head gently. "You did not know what I know. That is not a failure, Professor. It is simply a difference in experience." She nods slowly, though the weight of her earlier dismissal clearly still sits heavily with her. The remainder of the journey back toward the extraction point passes without further incident, though the mood of the group has shifted entirely. Where once students walked scattered and distracted, chatting carelessly about assignments and grades, they now move together, alert, watching the terrain the way I taught them to, if only for this one afternoon. Drin falls into step beside me as we near the final stretch toward the ridgeline where our transport is scheduled to meet us. He is quiet for a long moment, clearly working through something before finally speaking. "I said some things earlier," he begins carefully, "about your species, about you." "You did," I say simply, not filling the silence for him. He exhales slowly. "I was wrong. Not just about today. I think I was wrong about a lot of things." I glance at him, studying his expression carefully. There is no performance in his voice now, no attempt to save face in front of the group, just quiet, honest reflection. "Most people are, until they are shown otherwise," I say. "It is not really your fault. Your world never had to teach you what mine had to teach me." He nods slowly, processing that thought, as we continue walking toward the ridgeline, where the familiar hum of an approaching shuttle finally reaches our ears. For the first time since stepping foot on this station months ago, I feel something shift within the group around me. Not pity, not curiosity treated like a spectacle, something closer to respect, earned not through words, but through action, exactly the way I always believed it would have to be earned. As the shuttle descends toward the ridge, its landing lights cutting through the pale gray dust, kicked up by its engines, I allow myself, just for a moment, to feel something I rarely let myself feel in front of others. Quiet, steady pride. Not because I proved anything to this class, though perhaps I did, but because, for the first time since arriving here, I stood exactly as I am, without hiding, without shrinking, without needing to explain myself. And they finally understood. The shuttle ride back to the station is quiet in a way I have never experienced with this class before. Not the careless, chatty quiet of students scrolling through notes or trading jokes, but something heavier, more thoughtful. Occasionally, Someone glances toward me, then quickly looks away, as though still processing what they witnessed only an hour earlier. I sit near a viewport, watching Cairns Hollow shrink behind us, its pale gray surface once again looking peaceful and harmless from a distance, the way it did when we first arrived. I know better now, and so does everyone else on this shuttle. Professor Voss spends most of the return trip drafting an updated incident report on her datapad, occasionally glancing toward me with an expression I have not seen from her before, something between professional respect and quiet gratitude. When we finally dock at the Academy station, she approaches me before I can disembark with the rest of the class. "I will be recommending a full survey correction for Cairns Hollow," she says, "and I intend to include your observations in the official record. Your instincts likely prevented serious harm today." "Thank you, Professor," I say simply. She hesitates a moment longer, studying me carefully. "May I ask you something, Nora? Off the record." I nod. "Where did you learn to do what you did today? Not the specific tactics, the calm, the certainty." "I have taught survival theory for over a decade, and I have never seen anyone move through danger the way you did, without hesitation, without panic." I consider the question carefully before answering. It is not one I am often asked directly, and for once, I do not feel the familiar urge to deflect it. "Earth was not always the world it is now," I say quietly. "For a long time, survival was not something we studied in classrooms. It was something we had to earn every single day, against predators, against environments that did not care whether we lived or died. Children on my world grow up learning these lessons early, not because we choose to, but because the alternative is far worse." Professor Voss listens closely, something shifting behind her eyes as the weight of my words settles in. "We call it a Deathworld," I continue. "Not as an insult, as a simple description, a place where nature never once made survival easy, and where every generation before mine had to become stronger, smarter, and more disciplined just to make it to the next one." I had heard the term before, she admits quietly. I did not fully understand what it meant, not truly, not until today. Most people from soft worlds do not, I say without bitterness. It is not something that translates easily into words. It has to be lived, or at the very least, witnessed. She nods slowly, her earlier composure returning, though tempered now with a clear new understanding. "Thank you, Nora, for today, and for this conversation." I offer a small nod in return before finally stepping off the shuttle and into the wide, familiar corridor of the Academy station. The days following the incident bring a shift in the atmosphere around me that I am still adjusting to, where I once moved through crowded hallways largely unnoticed, or noticed only for quiet jokes about my species. I now find myself greeted with nods, brief conversations, occasional questions from students I have never spoken to before. Mira becomes a near-constant presence beside me in the days that follow, no longer simply a polite classmate, but something closer to a genuine friend. She asks thoughtful questions about Earth, about the history behind what happened to my world, listening with real curiosity rather than the detached fascination I have grown used to from others. "I keep thinking about what you said," she tells me one afternoon as we walk together toward the dining hall, "about fear being a tool. I never thought about it that way before." "Most people do not have to," I say. "On soft worlds, fear is rarely useful information. It is just an unpleasant feeling to be managed and moved past. Where I come from, fear is data. It tells you something important, if you are willing to listen to it, instead of running from it." She considers that for a long moment. "I think I understand a little better now why you always seemed so calm, even before all this happened. It was not that nothing bothered you. It was that you already knew how to carry it." I glance at her, quietly surprised by how closely she has come to understanding something I have rarely tried to explain to anyone here. "That is exactly it," I say softly. Drin Kessel's transformation surprises me the most in the weeks that follow. The confident, dismissive student who once mocked my species without hesitation becomes, unexpectedly, one of the most consistent people checking in on me, asking genuine questions about survival training, about the history of Earth's difficult centuries, about what daily life looked like for a child growing up somewhere so different from his own peaceful homeworld. One evening, as the two of us sit together in the Academy's observation lounge, watching distant stars drift slowly past the wide viewport, he finally asks the question I suspect has been sitting with him since Cairns Hollow. "Were you scared?" he asks quietly. "During all of it? Even for a moment?" I think carefully before answering, wanting to give him an honest answer rather than a comfortable one. Fear was there, I admit. It is always there, in situations like that, but fear and panic are not the same thing. Panic is fear left unmanaged, allowed to make your decisions for you. What I was taught, from a very young age, was how to feel fear and still think clearly through it. That is the actual skill. Not the absence of fear, but the discipline to work alongside it instead of being controlled by it. Drin nods slowly, turning the thought over in his mind. "I always assumed strength meant not feeling afraid at all," he admits. "I think I misunderstood what real strength actually looks like. Most people from your kind of world do," I say gently, without judgment. "It is not a flaw, it is simply a difference in what your world demanded of you growing up. My world demanded something else entirely." He is quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "For what it's worth, I am glad your world made you exactly who you are. Even if it came at a cost none of us can fully understand." His words settle into something warm and unfamiliar in my chest, an acknowledgement I have rarely received so openly since arriving at this academy. "Thank you," I say simply. "That means more than you probably realize." As the weeks continue, whispers of what happened on Cairns Hollow spread quietly through the wider student body, carried mostly through first-hand accounts from those who were present that day. I notice a subtle shift in how people speak about my species now, less as a curiosity to be pitied, and more as something to be genuinely respected, even if not fully understood. I do not seek this recognition out. I never came to this academy hoping to prove anything to anyone. I came to learn, to grow, to build a future beyond the harsh world that shaped me. But if that day in the canyon taught this class anything meaningful, it is that strength does not always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like someone sitting silently in the back row, watching, listening, waiting for a moment that others cannot yet see coming. One evening, weeks after the incident, I find myself once again in xenobiology class, sitting in my familiar seat toward the back of the room. Professor Voss begins the lecture, and for the first time since I arrived at this academy, I notice something different in the way my classmates carry themselves around me. No condescending glances, no quiet jokes traded behind cupped hands, just quiet acknowledgement, the kind earned through action rather than given freely through assumption. Mira leans over briefly before the lecture begins, offering a small, warm smile. "Good to have you back in your usual seat," she says. I smile faintly in return, settling into the familiar rhythm of the classroom around me. They used to think I was just a quiet exchange student, a curiosity from a distant, difficult world, someone to be pitied rather than understood. They know better now. They have seen, with their own eyes, exactly what a Deathworld teaches its children. Not simply how to survive, but how to remain calm when everything around you says you should not be able to. How to turn fear into focus, chaos into clarity, and quiet observation into decisive action when it matters most. I did not come here to prove anything, but now they know exactly what a hunter looks like. And it turns out, she was sitting quietly among them the entire time,